Hi, welcome to Life Unraveled, where we unravel life's little mysteries. I'm Amanda, and today we're going to talk about getting ready to read. Now, it's so important that children can read. It forms a big part of our life. And what we find often is that kids sometimes really struggle with this. So what are some of the things that we can do to help our kids getting ready to be able to read? Well, if we look at a 4-year-old, they are so curious. They love life. They're interested in everything. They're confident when they're speaking. They run around. They're full of life. They play dress-ups. They're just inquisitive and curious about everything that's around them. They're curious about social interactions between you and them, between other peers. They really have an insatiable appetite for learning. And we want to perpetuate this so that they have that love of learning for the rest of their life, because frankly, in today's society, we need to keep learning. Now, an integral part of this is reading. If we look at the way that children develop, what we'll find is that they develop physically. So there are some physical skills and some physical connections that need to happen for children to be able to read. For instance, they need to be able to track from left to right. And they need to be able to do this. To be able to do this, there is a connection that happens between the brain and the eye. And sometimes that connection isn't developed quick enough. Sometimes it develops at 3, sometimes it develops at 5, and there are some cases where it doesn't develop until the children are 8. Now, we can actually help develop their eye movements and things like that, and we can talk about that later. They also, as they're developing, they have emotional and spiritual and intellectual development, and all these are impacted by the ability. So it may sound a little bit far-fetched, but all of these aspects of children's development can impact their reading, and their reading also impacts these other areas. So getting them ready to read and making sure that they have those basic skills to be able to then read their first word is essential that we develop those this year. Now, how do kids actually learn? Well, they've been learning all their life. When they came out as tiny babes, they weren't able to do anything, but they'd watch you smile all the time. And then at 6 weeks, you get that first smile, and oh, how wonderful is that? And they learned that through their brain developing and them watching and listening to you, and they knew that a smile meant happiness. So they actually have learned right from the very beginning all of these skills through watching, through listening, through trial and error. I don't know of any child that gets up on their four limbs and starts crawling straight away. They're always rocking backwards and forwards, and then they take one step and fall over, and then they try again and again. Well, reading is exactly the same. Your child didn't learn to walk immediately. There was a whole heap of little steps that they went to. Now, if they hadn't been able to pull themselves up, then they wouldn't be able to walk. So these skills that I'm giving you today are the skills that the children need. They're sort of the pulling you up to get ready to walk skills, rather than the actual walking skills. When we talk about literacy and we talk about getting ready to read, there are a number of different aspects that we need to look at. So these aspects are the physical skills, being able to turn a page, for instance. Knowledge of the world. So if you'd never seen a fridge and there's a fridge in a book, you'd have no idea what it is. So you need to have that knowledge of the world so that you can then bring that knowledge to the book. And then once you've brought the outside knowledge to the book, then what you can do is you can get the information from the book and project that out to the outside world. So for instance, they may see a duck in the book, and when they go to the pond, they see a duck for the first time, they know that that's called duck. So you can see how they're transferring the information from the book to the outside world. So that knowledge of the world is so important. The more things that you can experience in your early years gives you a much better opportunity to be able to understand a lot more later on academically and intellectually. Learning to listen. Oh, this will be the hardest thing that you can do with your kids, but it's very, very important for their schooling. Being able to learn to listen to what you're saying and being able to understand that there may be a few things that you say before they run off and do something. So 2 or 3 step instructions, for instance. But also being able to sit and listen to a book. Now, the way that you do that, just briefly, there are a whole heap of things we're going to talk about, but one of the things is just sitting and reading to your children. It's really interesting, but talking and speaking to your kids and having conversations actually helps them to read. That way they can start to understand the grammar and understand how sentences are put together. And if you haven't talked to a child, then how would they know what reading is at all? So talking and speaking is important. Funnily enough, telling stories and music are 2 of the most important things for reading. Music is important because it gives you a rhythm of knowledge. So for instance, 5 little ducks went out one day, over the hills and far away. Mother duck said, quack, 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 but only 4 little ducks came back. So for that little song that you sing, 5 Little Ducks, that actually helps them with the rhythm of the language. And then when they can then put that information back into books that they look at, they'll remember the ducks and they'll remember that they go walking, and then they can see that in a book. And telling stories. The more that they can tell stories, the better that they can understand other people's stories. So the more stories that they tell you, the more conversations you have with them, that's actually teaching them how to read. So you've done it all before, I bet you. But here are some tips. Today we're going to specifically look at books, which books to choose for which ages. And it's really important that you look at books that are relevant to their age so that they can do the other thing we're going to talk about, which is learning to listen. So if you're, for instance, reading a book that they have no idea what the language is, it's not related to them at all, they have no interest in the topic, then they're not going to listen very well. For instance, the Harvard Review, the Financial Review, the newspaper, if you're reading that to your kids, then they're not going to have as much interest as if you're talking about, for instance, baby animals or ducks or things that they love and they relate to. Insects, gardens, those sorts of things that they can relate to. And the last thing that we're going to look at is how to tell a story and the important aspects of it and how to encourage your children to tell their own stories. Let's have a look at books and choosing a book. Now, I used to find that this was the hardest thing. What sort of book would my kids like? What are the books that they're going to sit and listen? Now, we have a handout that we give, and it's in the handout section at the end of these courses. And it goes through some of the books that I think are just essential for this age group. Now, if we have a look at babies, just quickly so that we can get the sequence up. Babies' books are books that are very simple. They've got simple facts, simple words. They generally use primary colours and they use big pictures, very simple big pictures with a lot of white space around. And then you're moving into that toddler crawler sort of stage, and those books are a little bit more complex. They have rhyming language in them, like Hairy Maclary from Donaldson's Dairy. You can hear that rhyming. They have a lot of rhythm to their books, to their words. They also have concepts such as going to the park or going to the doctor, things that they would have actually done. And in this way, they may be a little bit more complex, but the children can relate to that story. What you'll also find is the colours are just a little bit more subtler. So instead of just a red, you might have a magenta. So you've got a whole heap of just blends of colours, but not really, really, really subtle changes. You'll also have a fair bit of white space on your page still. And then you're moving into 3 to 4 years of age, which uses larger vocabulary. They're longer books so that the children sit and listen for a bit longer. They have more detail in their language that they're using, and they have very little white space in their books. Very, very little white space. So it's a lot more complex, the pictures have a lot more detail in them. And then you move to this 4 to 5 age group. Now this 4 to 5 age group, they use concepts such as dilemmas, social dilemmas that are happening in their lives, so they can choose a good or a bad. Fairy tales are great for this age group because they have a problem that happens and then a solution that happens after the problem. And these problem and solutions are important for them to be able to do their own stories, but also for them to understand how life is, really. One of the books that I really enjoy is Tuesday. Now, Tuesday is a book that has no words. Oh, actually, I lie. It says 8:15 in the beginning of the book, and at the end of the book, it has 9:30. And that's it. So what it does is, because it has no words and you have to make up the story, it stimulates their imagination and it makes you really have to think. Now, the other thing too is that as you're reading a book, often kids will know what the words are on the page, and if you get them wrong, they'll pick you up on it and they'll go, no, that's not right, or you've skipped a page. And they know the books because you've read them so many times. They know exactly what is what in the book. But in this book, because there are no words, you can start to develop your own story. So for instance, when I see this page, I have a look and I go, oh, the sun is setting and the moon starts to rise as the turtle looks around for a big surprise. Now in this situation, I made it a little bit rhyming. I love rhyming and I think it's really great for the kids. So you can start to do your own rhyming and you'll get really good at it. But you don't have to rhyme. You could actually just do a normal story. And each time that you go back to this book, you'll say it in a different way. For instance, this time I'm going to say, the pink and purple sky started going dark. It was sunset. The luminescent moon started to rise from the horizon. And as she rose, I could see further and further afield. Hi, my name's Tommy, and I'm a tortoise. So you can see how I then changed it up. I actually had Tommy the tortoise talking. And so everything in the rest of the book will be related to Tommy the tortoise. These sorts of things are great to be able to do. And the children then have to start telling their own stories. Maybe you could say, what do you think that we could say the story would be in this picture? And pick out little bits of detail in the picture that you can then focus on. Now we go through in a lot more detail in our Ready to Read course, our literacy course. So if you want more detail on any of these aspects, you can go to the literacy course and that will give you a great understanding of what you need to do to get your child ready to read. That's the end of part 1 of Ready to Read. Part 2 is the next video in the series. Look forward to seeing you then. Catch you later, bye. This video was produced by Imagination Pty Ltd for Life Unravelled. All advice and information given during this course is designed for general use only. If you have any concerns for your child, please seek professional advice as soon as possible. For terms and conditions, please see website www.lifeunravelled.com.au.